Welcome everyone to Budget Night 2023, the 9th of May, which is a more typical night for a budget night, but we had that October practice one from the previous year. This year it's getting serious to the point where it could actually be the first time since 2017, 15 years, we see a budget back in black. Jeremy, is the economy booming? What's happened? Why have we got so much money?
Well, as we were having a chat prior to coming on live, there's a number of changes that have happened in the economy. A very strong resource sector, as you mentioned, Cate, rightly so. Commodities are booming, prices are still quite high, and as we all spoke about, low unemployment, more people in jobs, less people getting government handouts. So that is a major factor to why the government is taking in more tax dollars and royalties, which is contributing to a significant change and difference into creating a budget surplus that we hopefully will see tonight.
And the big question is, what are they going to spend it on? Although they've leaked some information that, and this doesn't sound like a rounded number, 82% of additional revenue will go back in the bank account. But there are a couple of things that they flagged that they will spend money on. I should do the formalities first, though. I'm joined by Jeremy Iannuzzelli from KHI Partners and Cate Bakos from Cate Bakos Property. Thank you very much for joining me, you two. We had a lot of fun in October last year. I had quite a few messages today saying, will you be doing budget night? I won't be watching, but I just wanted to make sure you're not at home. It's a big night for us because we're all sort of nerds in a way. Jeremy with the finance, Cate with the property. Cate, the property market has been in the news quite a bit with this rental crisis, the affordability crisis. There's been nothing leaked so far, but what do you think we might see in that space? Or is there anything that stands out to you in those special leaked documents so far?
Yeah, there are a couple of little things. I think, rental assistance is probably something that we can anticipate for certain segments of the market. We've heard a lot, particularly last year, about build to rent and other initiatives. What we won't be hearing about, unless I fall off my chair, is ideas around how we can get more private investment to bolster up our rental stock numbers. Unfortunately, that's not going to get the popular vote, enticing mum and dad investors back in. But unfortunately, for the rental situation at hand, I think that supply, that's the critical thing, and building more, it takes a lot of money and a lot of time. So it'll be interesting to see how many budget nights we do, Mike, until we start seeing some kind of enticement or initiative to get more people investing.
One thing that I like to do, and this is a red hot tip for anyone playing at home, the budget speech will happen roughly at 7:30. Last year we had to wait a couple of clunky minutes waiting for people to take their seats, but actually at 7:30 or thereabouts, the speech in its entirety will be released on the Treasury website, for want of a better term. So the last two budgets that I did with you, Cate, whilst the Treasurer was doing his thing, I was control Fing for things like rent and housing and affordability. And last year was the first, last May we didn't get any hits. October we got some hits, but that was about, the Future Housing Fund, which kind of, according to Pete Wargent, who unfortunately wasn't able to join us this year because he's on holidays, honestly, on budget night. Does he even bloke? He basically said that they're talking about building roughly the amount of houses that they were planning to, that they build on long-term average anyway. So there wasn't really much in it. I'm not expecting too much there, but they're going to have to pay some lip service to that and those cost of living pressures, right?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that will be a topic tonight. It won't be glossed over. It's on everyone's minds. And we're seeing news feeds just worsening by the day. And I'm looking at the data every month that rolls in from CoreLogic. We've got rental growth figures in our major capitals that for units are getting close to 20% for 12 months rental growth, and over 10% for houses in some cities, and regions aren't immune to it either. It's across the board. So yeah, it's certainly a hot topic. And we haven't got a growing supply, Mike, and we've got more people coming onto our shores. We've got households that have been further divided since COVID. We've had a greater rate of relationship separations, and so we're seeing the household count go down, and we're seeing a pressing need for more homes.
That's funny, isn't it? I mean, that's a real thing, but part of the rental affordability crisis is divorces. You know, if we can just get roughly 12 to 28 people living per dwelling, we can solve this thing. But in real terms, that's not going to happen. Yeah, Jeremy, you've been dealing with, I suppose, a few inquiries from your client base, and of course, you're the small to medium to even large business champion tonight. A lot of people are starting to feel the bite on these interest rate increases, and of course, we've probably got potentially the one from last week yet to be passed on. We also saw the retail sales figures come out that Stephen Koukoulas has kind of called a retail recession, you know, with migration on a per capita basis. He's saying that this is, you know, a retail recession. What are you hearing at the coalface?
Yeah, so we're very lucky to, you know, to have a client base that's so dynamic and so active. So we really are in touch with what's happening at on the ground type of level. What we are seeing now, and again, it comes back to that old notion that the feel of interest rates doesn't actually start to take effect in the market at least 12 months until it first happens. So, you know, we're looking back to when rates started to rise. It was probably about May of 2022. And the phone calls and the conversations I'm having with clients now is about the cash flow. It is about their own surpluses or deficits. It's about their buffers that are in place. So we are starting to see a bit of a pinch now as far as the sentiment is concerned around how their properties are performing or how their personal buffers are performing. And I think as we start to move forward a little bit more, people will start to see the impact of how rates and when rates started to go up, what's happening in their back pocket today. So it's, you know, I never thought it would come to reality, that comment or that statement, that you never really feel the impact of rates until 12 months after it initially happens. But we are living that out now, and they're the conversations that I am having with many clients. And, you know, I think this budget's a bit of a balancing act by the Albanese government. We've got at one hand the RBA trying to curb inflation, and on the other hand, you've got the government trying to ease the cost of living. So it is a tightrope act tonight of giving enough, but not giving too much, to the point where it fuels inflation even further and rates have to continue to increase. So I'm looking forward to maybe a very balanced budget.
It's a really interesting point that you make, Jeremy, around how they balance the handouts from, you know, things getting away from us again and running away. And we will see some segmentation with handouts, and they might be in the form of handouts that we weren't anticipating. So whether it's relief with specific major household expenses by way of discounting, perhaps, I think we'll certainly see something around energy in that kind of format. But to your point, we've really had a hard time with this particular inflationary period, because it followed COVID lockdowns where a lot of households saved a lot of money. And not only did we save a ton of money, so we had really good war chests for good times, we also had an overinflated sense of YOLO, you only live once, and people just wanted to get out and travel and spend. Even when the rate increases were starting to bite borrowing capacity and really starting to impact people's monthly mortgage repayments, they were still determined to take that summer holiday. I mean, half of Melbourne disappeared to Bali over the break. And I think we're dealing with a very different, you know, set of values and feelings about being with our loved ones and having a break and having a holiday and spending some money. So that they were really up against it from the start, because we had a very different sentiment to past periods of high inflation and tightening rates.
That's a good point, and I think it's a positive thing that we all kind of did some of the navel gazing and look at what's important to us. That was one of the positive things that came out of the pandemic. That, and also if you had Zoom shares, you did terribly well as well. But yeah, you're right. The government threw a ton of money at us. We saved in macro terms a ton of money, and then we went out and spent it. And we put a real dent in global supply chains, and the same people that are saying, oh, interest rates are going up, just got back from Bali, just got their new Range Rover Discovery, right? So people aren't necessarily making that connection. Yeah. That was a bit too close to home, maybe that one. Now, and Bali have even said, we actually kind of want to put a bit of a cap on tourists, right? I wonder if that's an Australian influence there. Let's have a look at some of the things that we expect the government will be throwing money at. They've tabled a $3 billion package on energy relief. So obviously the cost of energy is hitting the vulnerable very, very hard. We're talking $2.2 billion of expenditure on the health system, $19 billion increase in defence. Many of the projects after the defence white paper came out will be scrapped, but we're still getting those submarines that came up last budget. That's a real sticking point for me, because we've got the Collins class submarines that we bought and paid a fortune for. They were dodgy. Then we had the spat with that French chappie because we didn't want to buy his stuff. Now we've got the AUKUS stuff, and gosh, nuclear submarines. Yes. Yeah, we'll probably never hear the full story about that one. There's the NDIS is one of the things that's costing us a lot of money. They're projecting that they can save 60 billion over the next 10 years with some tweaks to that. The welfare budget is likely to be another one of the things that puts us back into a deficit after this short-term potential surplus. But the positives are the coal, iron ore, gas. We've done very well with that. The tweaks to the super, which they're sort of saying affect only the very, very wealthy. Jeremy might have some views on that. Where tobacco consumers, so smokers, you're in for a tough night. Cigarettes are going to get more expensive. That's sort of like, that's a politically easy one, isn't it? Because, I think 10% of people smoke. Most people that don't smoke don't really like the fact that cigarettes exist. So it seems an easy one to throw the kitchen sink at. And then, the resources rent tax. That's one I wanted to ask you guys about. But I might start with you, Jeremy, on the super. Are these tweaks to super that they're basically saying will save us a lot of the bottom line only for super wealthy people?
Look, it is definitely at present for super wealthy people, no doubt about it. But as superannuation's been more ingrained into the working culture that we're currently in, because you've got to remember, super wasn't made compulsory until, I believe, the early 90s. So for many people, they're starting to contribute into super much earlier. And the way super funds are moving, the way people are becoming more educated with, contributing more concessional contributions yearly, the goal is, and that's what it was set out to do, was enable you and aid you for your retirement in the future. I don't like what the Labor government have done with the changes to the super. It brings in a very Californian-based style of unrealized taxing on gains. I'm not a fan of it. So essentially what's happening is, once your superannuation fund per member or on a member basis exceeds $3 million, they're going to tax you on the unrealized gains that it grows by during that period of time, very similar to the Division 293 tax system. I'm not a fan of it. I've always believed that once you make the money, you get taxed on the money you make, not on a balance sheet movement. But that's what the Labor government is proposing. And that's to stop people storing huge amounts of wealth into super that they know will grow quite substantially in what they would call a tax-free or very low taxing environment. So I understand why they're doing it, because it is a very strategic ploy by many advisors to do that. But it's now starting to really change the definition of tax on gains from being realized to unrealized. And that's going down a path that not many people have really wanted to walk down in the past, but they're bold enough to do it, and we'll see what happens. And it's not going to be imposed until or if they win the next election.
And we still haven't seen the final comments on the indexation, how that's going to be treated as well. So has more come out on that side of things?
No, and that's the questions that are getting raised. How are they going to index it? Where's it going to move? But there's absolute radio silence on that. They're not talking about the indexation. I think this was a very quick move, that they needed to make some bold changes very quickly. And I think that was an easy one to do because it only affects a very small percentage. But longer duration that super's implemented inside the system, the more it will start to capture people.
Well, we've only got to look at kind of the slow, insidious sort of
Kate, we might have to jump in there and help our good friend.
We can also see. Whoa! Did you lose me there for a second?
We did, mate. You went into the ether of the internet. We thought we'd jump in and save you a little bit if we could.
Sorry. I was just noticing here as well that Pete Wargent is using this as his personal chat room. So I've just put that up on the screen. Hi, Pete. Good to see that you're doing your holidays right and tuning in to Federal Budget Live. Feel free to put any of your comments online there, and we'll share them as well. Cate, now you have a science degree, so perhaps that makes you more qualified than the both of us to talk about iron ore and coal. But this resource rent tax. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but my understanding in reading Richard Dennis, who wrote Econobabble, talked about how the mining industry is actually a very small proportion it's a sector that employs a very small proportion of people, but gets a huge amount of tax incentives and credits from the government. Is this a quintessential labor ploy to tax the super rich on the resources, or is this kind of a little bit of a fair thing where we are sort of described as the lucky country because of our rich resources, and do those resources belong to each of us individually as taxpayers in a way?
Wow, that's not really a science question. That's a very deep and meaningful question to ask. I think if you asked Adam Bant, he'd be saying we should be completely changing it, and they deserve all they get. In fact, I think he almost word said that. But you've hit the nail on the head. So the change that they're proposing involves the credits that have been carried forward, and it's essentially been dubbed an ineffective tax generator, even though this petroleum resource rent tax rate is 40%, which sounds astonishing. By changing how the credit system works, don't ask me about that, I'll throw that back to you two. They're envisaging that there'll be significantly higher revenues for us to enjoy. They're also talking about an additional tax hike for offshore, so a royalty for offshore projects. And I guess we've always got to look at the pros and cons of this. Obviously, generating more tax revenue sounds great. Will it make any projects unviable? And if so, which ones? And then how will communities that are thriving on the work that's based on that project be impacted? They're the questions that I ask as a property person every time.
Yeah, and there's always those unintended consequences. I mean, we talk about the rental bidding changes, right? And then the knee-jerk reaction to that was we were seeing a lot of landlords put their property on the rental market for well in advance of what the market was saying was reasonable. But that's kind of their reaction to, okay, well, you've sort of stopped us from being able to see as much as we can get from a rent bidding point of view. So we're going to have to start high and come down. That's where I worry about, doing my little control F and putting housing affordability and rents and seeing some sort of announcement that
looks like we're back on.
He'll come back to us.
He will. I like his point though, that for each action there's an opposite reaction. I mean, that's fundamental science for you, but we do have to look at what the impact will be when we have policies. And talking about rental affordability, and the Greens are proposing rental caps, rental freezes. That's one of the best ways to drive private investors out of the property market if you're taking complete control of their asset and telling them that they won't be able to enjoy any kind of rental increase that they'd ordinarily have anticipated. And Pete Kalizos raised a really interesting point about rents while I'm banging on about it. We had a long period of low and no rental growth, and if you plotted it out in a straight line, we've really only played catch up. And I know that's a horrible thing for tenants to be hearing right here, right now. And the fact that we've got such tight vacancy rates and people who don't have a roof over their head is a disaster. But when we talk about rental returns, over the long term, we've only really just been catching up.
Agree. And I think the balancing act that the government also needs to make sure they get right is, sometimes a little intervention is the best intervention. When you distort things, and we saw that during the significant amount of COVID pandemic payments that many small businesses and individuals received, the challenge then was, and the opposite was the inflation that we've started to see in the market over the last 12 months. So I always come back to budget balancing. I suppose that's me, the accountant, balancing the books. It's getting the intervention right, enough to stimulate, but not enough to overstimulate, where you start becoming a controlling factor and manipulating the way economics works, and then you distort the supply and the demand, and therefore equilibrium has a really tough time to get back to its middle. And then we, as the individuals, the patrons of Australia, we're the ones who really suffer the most because of the bureaucracy that's involved at the top. So, yeah, it's good points that you've raised, Mike and Kate.
Now, we've got quite a few Queenslanders on the live chat. Here's Pete Wargent at it again. We've got Hayden West, Jordan de Jong, and Mr. Wargent as well. Queensland was one of those areas where we had some unintended consequences because they nearly got that land tax thing through. And I spoke to a couple of buyers agents at the Real Estate Business Awards last week that basically said they had investors boycotting the state. So in a state, or let's say looking at Brisbane or southeast Queensland, where most of the property investment is likely to happen, these are such tight rental markets, and they're trying to I guess decrease the issues on rental affordability by bringing in these land taxes, but it actually made investors go further afield. And we shared some data last week that the average distance between where people live and where their investment property has jumped from under 300 kilometres 3 or 4 years ago to 559 roughly during the pandemic to over 800 kilometres. So investors are voting with their feet when it comes to these locations that have got that anti-investor sentiment.
Yeah, I think it's dangerous always when you toy with free markets. As soon as you start to apply some kind of pressure to diminish one side or the other, there's bound to be another reaction, and sometimes they're the things that we don't think through really carefully when we have these policies put forward. And Mike, we chat about it all the time. It's also about votes, and that's a serious challenge for our policymakers.
As Pete Wargent himself says, Queensland, land taxes one day, investor rate hikes the next. That's pretty good gear. So what we're going to do is at 7:30, subject to my internet connection holding out, which I think, I don't know, we have to blame perhaps Malcolm Turnbull, the other side of government, for that one. We're going to go live to Parliament, and we're going to hear from Mr. Chalmers. We're going to do the live speech. I'll be doing my Control F stuff. You guys are welcome to put in the chat anything that you pop out, that pops out to you, because this is an interactive thing, right? We want you to be involved. And then, of course, we're going to get the juice from Cate and Jeremy. So we're around about, what are we? We're about 5 minutes away. And I would put the live Parliament stuff on there, but it is the worst elevator music you'll probably ever hear. So we'll try and avoid that for the moment. So we talked about the tightrope before. Jeremy, we've got inflation running away from us. The RBA is saying that it's going to be years before it gets within their target band, but we've got a cost of living crisis. That tightrope tightrope you talked about. How can the government put money back into people's pocket, which is quickly getting eroded by inflation, without having to push that inflation along by virtue of doing that? Is this a position that you would like to be filling, the role of Federal Treasurer?
Well, it's a tough one, and I always say the best money to spend in an economy is not necessarily putting cash into people's pockets, because that's where they ultimately go out and spend it on discretionary things, and therefore inflation, and that's more money chasing less goods, and therefore you've got price increases, and then the cycle just continues to go around in a big circle. But the one thing which I like, a way of putting the right money, things moving forward, is infrastructure spending. And that's what has been happening for the last, probably give or take the last 8 years, a huge amount of infrastructure spending. And that's not just here in New South Wales, but all over Australia. Heading up to Gold Coast a couple of weeks ago, that Gold Coast freeway's finally looking like it's almost finished already, which is fantastic. Lots of upgrades to freeways across Australia. And one thing that I did read on some early notes that were getting released is lots of Liberal Morrison initiated infrastructure spending is getting scrapped for reasons that were, a bit of cost blowout, is significantly over budget, wrong pricing. Those are things that if I'm going to be spending money as a government, I'd be wanting to spend money on those things first, building up a country, building up infrastructure, because there's so much surrounding wealth that comes from it, rather than, say, significant amounts of increases to unfortunately resulting in more handouts getting spent in the wrong places. So that's something that, if that really starts to shine through in this budget, will be quite disappointing. However, in saying that, they need to make sure that they are providing the voters what they're after, which is cost relief, especially power. I know that there's a significant amount of cost relief going to households, but the big one that I do like, and I think is not inflationary, but very deflationary, is small businesses getting about a $20,000 boost to help upgrade their electricity and cost efficiency. So it could be fridges, solar panels, lights. So those are the things which I think is good. It stimulates, but not stimulates an inflationary environment, rather helps create deflation by taking away some of the costs that businesses or small businesses might face. So there are a couple of the things that we'll see. Cheaper medicines, more scripts. That's generally been a theme across many of the budgets, and that does help. The more elderly and potentially more vulnerable to inflationary environments, especially if they're on pensions, and they're not doing a huge amount of job seeker increases. By memory, I saw about a couple dollars, $3 a day, $40 a week. Although still, I believe, a little bit below where it needs to be. It's not where it was during COVID, where it literally doubled overnight. So a couple good things there. Hopefully we'll see in the budget, but nevertheless, the balance is important.
Great point.
It is, absolutely. And look, there's movement at the station when it comes to, let's see if I can do this. Got it.
Here we are.
We're back.
Yeah.
Who doesn't love this live production? Right? We always.
In its rawest form, Mike. Always, you can't go wrong in its rawest form.
Got some newcomers. Hi, everyone.
Now, we do want to talk about. Pardon me there. All right, we're about. Yeah, okay, almost. I can see the treasurer. See, I'm looking at a different screen here. He pulled out a chair and then he put it away. No, we've got the Speaker of the House. This is great for a podcast, isn't it? It's like listening. Oh, here we go. All right, I'm gonna stick it on here. Thanks, guys. Let's get into the budget.
24 and the explanatory memorandum.
I call the clerk.
First reading, a bill for an act to appropriate money out of the Consolidated Revenue Fund for the ordinary annual services of the government and for related purposes.
I give the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the bill be now read a second time. Speaker, we acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, the Yuggera and the Yugambeh country around Logan, and all the First Nations of Australia, their elders, customs and traditions. And we recognise the opportunity that we have this year to move forward together, listening to each other in a spirit of unity and respect. Mr Speaker, the budget we present to the Australian people tonight provides cost of living relief that is responsible and affordable and prioritises those most in need. It delivers historic investments in Medicare and the care economy, making it easier and cheaper for Australians to see their doctor. It broadens opportunity by breaking down the barriers of disadvantage and exclusion. It lays the foundations for growth by embracing clean energy and investing in value-adding industries, people, skills, technology and small business. And it strengthens the budget with a surplus forecast for this year with less debt than smaller deficits compared with recent budgets. These are the foundations on which our government is building a stronger economy and a fairer society, with greater security in a time of economic uncertainty, more opportunities in more parts of our country, and a renewed determination for Australia to make the most of the defining decade ahead. Speaker, in all of our decisions, we seek to strike a considered, methodical balance between spending restraint to keep the pressure off inflation while doing what we can to help people struggling to make ends meet, making sure that vital services like Medicare and the National Disability Insurance Scheme are secure and reliable and sustainable, and dealing with immediate near-term challenges while investing in our long-term national economic success, seeing our people through the hard times and setting our country up for a better future. Mr Speaker, the global economy is slowing due to persistent inflation, higher interest rates and financial sector strains. Outside of the pandemic and the global financial crisis, the next 2 years are expected to be the weakest for global growth in over 2 decades, and this will affect us here in Australia. Our economic growth is expected to slow from 3.25% this year to 1.5% next year before recovering to 2.25% the one after. Despite this, our economy will continue to create jobs and unemployment is expected to remain low by historical standards, 4.25% in 23-24, 4.5% the year after. And in this environment, inflation remains our primary economic challenge. It drives rate rises and it erodes real wages, which is why this budget is carefully calibrated to alleviate inflationary pressures, not add to them. Our policies to ease the pressure on households will take 0.75 percentage point off inflation in 23-24, which is expected to fall from 6% this year to 3.25% next year, returning to the Reserve Bank's target band in 2024-25. Still higher than we'd like, for longer than we'd like, but tracking in the right direction. So while Australia may have a lot coming at us, we have a lot going for us as well. High prices for the things we sell overseas, a strong, well-regulated, secure banking system, low unemployment, and welcome signs that after a decade of being kept deliberately low, wages are moving again. Yeah. Wages growth for 2023-24 is now forecast to be 4%, up 0.25 percentage point from what was expected in October. This combination of lower than expected inflation and higher wages means that an earlier and stronger return to real wages growth is forecast for 2023-24. Speaker, at the same time, we understand that Australians are under the pump right now, and that's why providing responsible, targeted relief is the #1 priority in this budget. Our $14.6 billion cost of living plan will provide help with power bills, bring down out-of-pocket health costs, support vulnerable Australians, create more affordable housing and boost wages. Speaker, back in November, gas bills were set to go up by 20% in 23-24 and electricity bills were set to rise by 36%. Now, this was the high price Australians were slated to pay for the Russian invasion of Ukraine and a decade of energy policy failure here at home. Our government refused to stand by and let this happen. We took urgent and targeted action to place a cap on coal and gas prices And tonight we are delivering up to $3 billion in direct energy bill relief for eligible households and small businesses co-funded with the states and territories. More than 5 million households will have up to $500 deducted from their power bills in the next financial year. Real relief, right off your power bill, right when you need it. And because of our policies, electricity price increases are expected to be around 25 percentage points less than what was projected, and 16 percentage points less for gas. And a big part of making sure that energy bills are more affordable into the future is improving the energy efficiency of Australian homes, and not just new builds. Through this budget, we are investing $1 billion to help provide low-cost loans for double glazing and solar panels and other improvements that will make homes easier and cheaper to keep cool in summer and warm in winter. A common sense program that will help family budgets and reduce emissions. Speaker, our first budget capped the price of medicines on the pharmaceutical benefit scheme for around 3.6 million Australians, so that most now pay no more than $30 for the medicines that they need. In our second budget, we're investing $2.2 billion to increase access to life-changing medicines through the PBS. And from September this year, patients will be able to get more of the medicine they need for less money and less hassle. Instead of having to go back to their pharmacist every month, many people with common chronic illnesses will be able to get 2 months' worth of treatment for over 300 different medicines. This change will save people up to $180 a year, and for millions of Australians, the cost of medicines will be cut in half. Speaker, our government is proud that in our first year in office, 339,000 new jobs have been created. But even with unemployment at historic lows, we know there are still people struggling to find work and struggling to get by. The pressures on the budget are acute, but as a Labor government, we will always strive to help those who need it the most. That's why tonight we announce a $40 per fortnight increase for job seeker recipients, plus those on youth allowance, Austudy and other income support payments, helping to deliver a much-needed $4.9 billion boost in support to around 1.1 million Australians looking for work, studying or doing apprenticeships. And we are going further to help the single biggest group of Australians on JobSeeker, those aged 55 and over. Until now, people aged 60 and over and on payments for a long time have received a higher rate in recognition of the additional barriers that they face finding work. But the truth is, it gets more difficult earlier than that. The majority of people aged 55 and over on JobSeeker are women, many with little to no savings or superannuation, and who are at risk of homelessness. So tonight we're extending the extra support for those aged 60 and over to include Australians 55 and over. More help for some of the most vulnerable people in our community. And in the same spirit, we're expanding parenting payments single, so it will now be available to single parents until their youngest child turns 14 rather than 8. This will provide 57,000 families with an extra $176.90 per fortnight. Over 90% of these parents are single mums. They deserve our respect and our support for the incredible job that they do. Speaker, for too long, secure, affordable housing has been out of reach for too many Australians. Tonight, to help ease the pressure on people feeling the pain of rising rents, we are increasing the maximum rates of Commonwealth rent assistance by 15%. This will provide up to $31 extra a fortnight for people renting in the private market and community housing, the largest increase in more than 30 years. But we know an essential part of the solution to pressures in the housing market is more homes for Australians. Our housing accord aims to build 1 million new well-located homes over 5 years from 2024. We're going to help drive this with a new tax break for build-to-rent projects, cutting the managed investment trust withholding tax from 30 to 15%. and by increasing the liability cap of the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation by $2 billion to support more lending to community housing providers. We want more Australians to know the security of a roof over their head, which is why we're also working with the states and territories to improve planning, to build more houses and to deliver a better deal for renters. For this same reason, implementation of the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund is critical to build more of the social and affordable houses that our people need. Speaker, our government came to office promising to get wages moving again. They're now growing at their fastest rate since 2012. And let's be clear, when it comes to the cost of living, fair wages for workers are not the problem, they're part of the solution. Meaningful and sustainable wages growth is a fundamental feature of an economy that rewards people for their hard work. Meaningful and sustainable wages growth is why we've consistently advocated for low-paid Australians so they don't go backwards. The Prime Minister has said it many times, the heroes of the pandemic deserve more than our thanks. They deserve fair pay for their vital work. I'm proud that our budget provides $11.3 billion to fund a 15% increase in award wages for more than 250,000 aged care workers. This pay rise will help retain, reward and recruit the hard-working people who care for our loved ones as they grow old. And the message from our government to the aged care workers of Australia is very simple. You deserve every cent. Speaker, one of the things that makes this the best country in the world is our shared belief that every Australian should be able to access affordable, reliable healthcare. But right now, too many are finding it more and more difficult to see a doctor. The costs are too high, the wait times are too long, and the consultation is often too short. Families are being forced into a lose-lose choice between getting the help they need or paying their other bills. This robs parents of peace of mind and it puts families under strain. It means more problems go undiagnosed or untreated. And it means our workforce is not as healthy or productive as it could be and should be. And we want to change that. With new funding to build 8 more of our urgent care clinics so people in regional communities and growing suburbs can see a GP. A further $445 million to enable doctors, nurses and allied health professionals to cooperate for better care. Changes that will make it easier for Australians to get essential services at their pharmacy, like vaccinations. And tonight, Mr. Speaker, I am proud to announce, as a centrepiece of this budget, our Labor government will triple the bulk billing incentive. This is the biggest increase to the incentive ever, delivering a $3.5 billion boost that will help GPs provide free consultations to around 11.6 million eligible Australians, including children, pensioners and other concession card holders. All of this will help take pressure off our public hospitals and emergency departments still feeling the strain of a once-in-a-century pandemic. And it will ensure that for millions of people, the quality of your health care is guaranteed, not by your credit card, but by your Medicare card. Speaker, investing in Medicare, helping with the costs of energy and housing, and supporting people most in need are all essential measures to assist Australians under pressure. But we know the best long-term guarantee of rising living standards and stronger wages and a better quality of life is a growing and productive economy. That's why our budget is underpinned by a plan to modernise our economy and maximise our strengths by making Australia a renewable energy superpower with strong strategic industries in global supply chains, investing in our people and their skills and supporting small businesses to innovate and grow. Speaker, Australia's biggest opportunity for growth and prosperity is the global shift to clean energy. By acting now, our resources, our researchers and our regions can help power the world. That's why in tonight's budget, we are investing $2 billion in a new hydrogen Head Start program so Australia can be a world leader in producing and exporting hydrogen power while reducing our emissions in heavy industry here at home. Hydrogen power means Wollongong, Gladstone and Whyalla can make and export everything from renewable energy to green steel. Seizing these kinds of industrial and economic opportunities will be the biggest driver and determinant of our future prosperity. The government is making the biggest ever investment in Australia's energy transformation. This budget allocates $4 billion to realising our future as a renewable energy superpower, bringing the government's total investment to more than $40 billion. This includes part of our $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund to support the development of green industries, manufacturing and more, and a new capacity investment scheme that will unlock over $10 billion of investment in firmed up renewable energy projects up and down our East Coast. These strategic investments will work in partnership. Abundant, affordable, renewable energy powering new jobs and new industries in our regions and our suburbs, while our safeguard mechanism will encourage business to invest in the path to net zero. To realise this vision, we're making targeted investments in green industries, as well as technology and other value-adding areas, including a new Powering Australia Industry Growth Centre to help Australian businesses manufacture renewable technologies, funding to support the growth of quantum and AI, plus $286 million of investment in our creative sector. This will create new opportunities right across our economy, and so will our historic and vital investment in defence and national security. The AUKUS agreement will directly support 20,000 high-skill, high-wage jobs over the next 30 years in advanced manufacturing and broaden and deepen our industrial base. To make sure all of these jobs and opportunities extend to every part of our country, we're investing $3.7 billion for a revamped 5-year national skills agreement with the states and territories. And we're creating 300,000 fee-free TAFE places to train Australians in critical and emerging sectors. We're expanding access to foundational skills so that all Australians aged over 15 can develop the language, numeracy and digital skills that they need. And we're encouraging more women into apprenticeships through a new Australian Skills Guarantee. Speaker, in this budget, we also back Australian small business with a $20,000 instant asset write-off, a new small business energy incentive to support investments in power-saving assets, and new help for small businesses to adopt and adapt to digital technology. Speaker, we are the first government in Australia's history with a majority of women in our ranks. And as the Finance Minister and the Minister for Women often says, we know equality for women is not an add-on, it's not a nice to have, it's absolutely crucial for our prosperity. That's why we've taken action to close the gender pay gap, introduced 10 days of paid family and domestic violence leave, made gender equity an objective of the Fair Work Act and put a new focus on workers in the care economy. And on 1 July, Australians will begin to benefit from cheaper early childhood education and enhanced paid parental leave. And tonight we build on this work by dedicating almost $590 million to the National Plan to End Violence Against Women and Children, and investing $72.4 million to retain and recruit more early childhood educators, and by abolishing the punitive Parents Next program while getting on with designing a voluntary system that genuinely supports mothers preparing for work. Speaker, alongside financial support for Australians in need, we're also investing in new programs to tackle entrenched disadvantage, putting our trust in the knowledge and passion of locals to break the chains of intergenerational poverty. I see it in my own community, library programs unlocking the world of learning, sporting clubs building pride, community groups mentoring young people into apprenticeships, breakthroughs and progress driven by locals and leaders. And tonight we back their hard work with a $200 million plan which includes funding place-based partnerships, encouraging evidence-based policy directed at a local level, investment in projects that are delivering measurable success, a new partnership that will help government and philanthropy to coordinate their efforts. And in addition, more funding for community organisations so that they can pay their bills and pay their workers and keep delivering for people in need. This will sit alongside $1.9 billion for First Nations health, housing, education, employment and other essential services, and $250 million for a new Central Australia package to improve safety and provide more opportunities for more people in their communities. Speaker, from energy bill reliefs to national defence, manufacturing to Medicare, investments in this budget aim to make Australia more resilient and more secure in uncertain times. And fundamental to this is our responsible economic management and our efforts to put the budget on a much stronger foundation. This budget, we've returned 82% of the extra revenue windfall that's come largely from lower unemployment, stronger jobs and wages growth, and higher prices for key exports. We've now returned 87% over this budget and the last. We've also found $17.8 billion in savings and redirected spending, $40 billion over two budgets. And we've limited annual real spending growth to just 0.6% over 5 years. Because our first two budgets made such a firm commitment to responsibility and restraint, we are now forecasting a small surplus in 2022-23, which would be the first in 15 years. Yeah. We expect that to be followed by a deficit of $13.9 billion in 23-24 and lower deficits across the forward years compared to recent budgets, leading to a $125.9 billion improvement in the budget over 5 years and a much lower public debt burden. Gross debt to GDP is now expected to peak lower and earlier at 36.5% of GDP in 25-26, where it will be $154 billion less than was expected in March 2022. And because we're returning most of the welcome improvement in revenue to the budget, debt will be almost $300 billion lower by the end of the medium term, saving $83 billion in interest costs over the next 12 years. Speaker, we are expecting one of the biggest turnarounds on record, while dealing with a whole host of programs and services which were left without ongoing funding. In October, this meant an additional $4.1 billion in spending. In May, we've had to find another $7.5 billion, including $1.5 billion for legacy health funding and to make sure that Australians retain access to their My Health record, and more than $800 million to sustainably fund our biosecurity system to keep our farmers and producers secure. Speaker, our government is building a strong, sustainable care economy that works for carers and for the people they care for, which is why we're extending disability support programs and investing in additional home care packages. We're upholding the security of our nation and the stability of our region, which is why we're implementing the recommendations of the Defence Strategic Review and allocating $1.9 billion to strengthening our relationships in the Pacific. And we're supporting those who have served and sacrificed, which is why we're spending $64.1 million to continue eliminating the claims backlog so that veterans get faster access to the support that they need and deserve. Speaker, beyond the immediate pressures on our budget, there are genuine structural challenges facing us into the future: defence, health, aged care, the NDIS, and interest payments on debt. Tonight, we're putting in place some modest but meaningful revenue measures to help address this, like tightening superannuation tax concessions for those with balances exceeding $3 million, a 15% global and domestic minimum tax for large multinational companies, changes to the petroleum resource rent tax so that Australians receive a fairer return on the sale of our natural resources sooner, raising the tax on tobacco by 5% for 3 years and extending tax compliance programs. But the inescapable truth is that the federal government cannot put all the services that Australians expect and deserve on a more sustainable footing just by ourselves. That's why the Prime Minister has brought together the states and territories to agree on a new cooperative approach, so we can secure the future of essential services and programs that both levels of government support. And so we can make sure that the NDIS continues to provide life-changing outcomes for future generations of Australians with a disability. Under Labor, the NDIS is here to stay. We are determined to make sure every dollar counts and every dollar goes to improving the lives of the participants the scheme was established for. Our changes are designed to put the interests of participants first as we cooperate to moderate the growth in costs. It took a Labor government to create the NDIS, and this Labor government will secure its future. Yeah. Speaker, 122 years ago today, this federal parliament first met, called to serve a new nation on an ancient continent created by a vote of the people. Today, Australia is bigger, fairer, more diverse, more open to the world and more engaged with our region than anyone alive at Federation could possibly have imagined. And yet what brought this country together was a belief that the future could belong to Australia and that we would be stronger and safer and more prosperous if we worked together to seize its opportunities and share its rewards. A commonwealth of common purpose. And that optimism and resilience has sustained us and carried us through downturns and disaster, through recession and pandemic. And the belief in opportunity fairly shared has underpinned our greatest achievements, from Medicare to superannuation. The same spirit underpins constitutional recognition through a voice. It drives our government and it shapes this budget. A determination to tackle the big challenges and to seize the big chances. A deep faith in our people, their skills, their smarts, their innovation and their aspiration. This tonight is a plan for security, for prosperity, for growth. It's an economic strategy to help with cost of living pressures now and to maximise and extend the opportunities of the future to more of our people in more parts of our country in the defining, decisive decade ahead. And so, Mr. Speaker, for all of these reasons, I commend this bill and this budget to the House.
Here I am, mate. Here I am. There we have federal budget 2023, and great to see some input from people in the comments there. Thanks for participating, especially Pete, who, whilst isn't here, has been chiming in here and there. And his takeaway, I'll put that back up on the screen, lots of spending on renewable energies. And that was a surprise to me, the investment in the hydrogen technology, instant asset write-offs. They're sort of something that we'll see every budget, I think. He's sort of saying they could have reported a big surplus, but they're spending up quite big. And that is quite surprising. Now, it begs the question, starting with you, Jeremy, with the spending that they're spending, is it the spending that we need? Is it going to increase inflationary pressures, or is this investing in the infrastructure like you really wanted to see?
Yeah, there's a bit there from an infrastructure spend. I think the key takeaways are, yes, there is a small surplus that they've suggested, but they have made it very clear there'll be deficits moving forward. It's definitely a very green budget. We can definitely see a lot of influence from the Green members, the Green side of the Parliament there. So they definitely won quite a bit in that budget speech and in that budget takeaway. So a lot of the money, it's the irony of it, a lot of money came from the key exports, which they don't explicitly say that it comes from iron ore, oil, gas, and all those things. But nevertheless, that's where we've had a huge drive of revenue and tax dollars, and they're looking to obviously take further advantage of that via the petroleum rent tax. So that's going to obviously increase the revenue that the government has. But they've made it quite clear that they are going to still continue to curb spending, Mike, because they do anticipate quite still a large amount of interest that they do need to pay given the rate rises on the government debt that we have. But what he didn't note was how many of the projects the Liberal government did anticipate to start that they are scrapping. So again, we always say the devil will be in the details when they release the notes. A couple of things I picked up is there will be, from a managed investment trust point of view, the tax rate dropping from 30% to 15%. So that's going to help promote the larger organisations, build more properties and obviously have a lesser tax implication on it. And the big one I want to see is the tax break for the build to rent projects. That to me is a very incentivised infrastructure spend, very similar to the NRES scheme, I'm sure, that they brought out many years ago, but then later scrapped. I think that the 300,000 TAFE packages, fee-free packages, is a big one. Again, that's spending in the right area for education and upskilling. And I love the 20K instant asset write-off. They were looking at taking that away, during the COVID pandemic time and then extending it. And then now they've brought it back in a much smaller form, but nevertheless something significant to many small businesses. So I'd actually have to say he did a good job to balance where he spends the money and how much money he hands out and what he retains. So I actually think it's a very, very well delivered budget by Chalmers.
And you wanted to see some investment. Sorry, Jeremy, you wanted to see some investment on helping small businesses get on top of their energy bills. So there's some support for helping small business invest in some technology there. They've also used what Jordan Dion called the AI buzzword. So some sort of investment to help small businesses leverage AI. I don't know if that's a government delivered ChatGPT course. We know the government has a history of delivering things in a terrible way. But how do you think small business fared out of that?
Yeah, look, there's no major reforms that I can see that they're going to produce from it, similar to that of the COVID pandemic budget speeches. But again, 20K instant asset write-off, the small business energy scheme, I think is going to be quite good, especially for many small businesses suffering under the pressure of higher energy costs. And the adapt and adopt digital change, it was something that they did release back in the October budget about people spending money, small businesses spending money on computers and software and technology, that there'd be almost like an accelerated deduction attached to it. So for every dollar you spent, you got $120 a cent. Well, for every 100 you spent, $120 would be a tax deduction you could claim. So little things like that are definitely going to assist small business. The only one thing that I do say for everybody, that you would have heard Chalmers say that they're going to extend the tax compliance program. For everyone out there, what that means is they're going to be doing more audits. The audit activity from the ATO has increased tenfold. Many accountants will let you know that there's much more audit activity going on. And with the Chalmers government saying that they're going to be extending the tax compliance program, be prepared to be scrutinised on many of the little expenses you wish to claim moving forward in the future.
No robo-debt, right?
Well, let's see. They did it once and it didn't work very well, but keep trying until you hit
it. Jordan's sort of saying he's going to need an accountant now. Obviously, he's up to some dodgy stuff there, that tech entrepreneur. Hayden West is now saying, we'll just pay your audit insurance because that's going to be a worthwhile investment. Now, Cate, I did my Control F for rent and I got 16 hits straight away, and then I realised you can't say parent without rent. But then we did in the more affordable housing section, which is nearly a page of the speech. We had the Treasurer talking about the pain of rising rents. They're increasing the maximum rates of Commonwealth rent assistance by 15%, saying that will provide an extra $31 a fortnight for people renting in the private market or community housing, the largest increase in more than 30 years, but $31 a fortnight. Is that going to move the needle on affordability?
Look, for the lower end, it will certainly go a little way. It's not going to save the day, Mike, but one thing I did like about this budget is there's a breadth of offerings that will help lower income families and, singles, couples, because it's not just all about rent. Obviously, that's an enormous pressure, but so is energy. And I liked some of the energy assistance that was raised as well. Interesting that you talk about rent and the number of times that word came up, because not once did we hear about first home buyers, which has really been, tipped on its head if we contrast this budget to previous years, where that was the saying, the word that we heard consistently. We haven't heard anything about that. In fact, we can chat about an initiative that I think will help first home buyers that didn't really get airplay tonight, but we know that it's been a change by this government, and that's in relation to shared equity. But just before I step onto that discussion point, I think that what I noticed is that the impetus to increase housing was really on building more housing. It wasn't about more investor participation at all, and we didn't expect that it would be. But they've suggested increasing the liability cap by $2 million for community housing providers. Now, if it's a small provider, that's a significant amount, so increasing their borrowings. And also, as Jeremy mentioned, managed investment trusts withholding tax, moving that from 30% to 15%. That's clearly a move to entice investors to jump on board. So I think they've really considered how they can create more housing outside of physically paying for thousands of properties to be built. I think that this has been reasonably clever. But why don't we chat about the siblings and friends change to the shared equity benefit?
Yeah, please.
We've in the past until now, our shared equity offering that was announced last year enabled people to be able to get onto the property ladder when they'd otherwise have been precluded, by having the assistance of up to 25% of the purchase price from our federal government. Now, the states and territories have their own programs going. I know that Homes Vic has been running for quite a while. It's restricted, but it's a great offering for someone who really needs it. And there's something that I love about these initiatives. It really does enable people that have been wanting to get onto the property ladder, haven't been able to save an adequate deposit, or have servicing constraints. They can actually do that with the assistance of the government. And it's not for everyone. It's definitely not for investors to get savvy with and to purchase something to live in for a short period and then convert it to an investment property. That's not the intent for programs like this. It's really to help people that want to get onto the property ladder, haven't been able to without a bit of help. By changing it from singles and couples to now siblings and friends, it will open up the opportunity for a lot of people that have worked out a viable way to live together, to cohabitate, and to use an offering like this. So I think that's really clever. The thing that buyers need to be mindful of if they're going down this path is making sure it's got a degree of future proofing, or at least medium term future proofing, because jumping into something like this and then unraveling it when your situation changes, or you don't want to live with your sibling or your friend anymore, it could be quite a costly move to get out of it. But all in all, I think it was clever.
It's clear, Jeremy, and Cate referenced this as well, that there's no rhetoric from the government in and around private rental accommodation, i.e. the investors who traditionally have always supplied the greatest proportion of rental properties. We're now sort of seeing, their aims to build, what are they saying, 1 million well-located homes over 5 years from 2024. They're talking about the build-to-rent projects and cutting the tax from 30 to 15%, and also looking with the private, the Housing Future Fund, building more social housing, and implementing $10 billion in that side of things, that they're wanting institutional investors to solve this problem rather than the mum and dad investors. Is the mum and dad investor a political hot potato, do you think, or is this reminiscent of a Labor government that's perhaps wanting to have more involvement from the industry super funds and those sorts of things with their union roots?
Yeah, they've
I
got
think
always.
it's
So I'll let you go, Kate. No, I'll let you go, and I'll follow.
I think we're dodging a hot potato because it's very hard to shift the rhetoric from greedy landlord to mum and dad investor giving it a really good crack with, one property in the portfolio or whatever. We haven't managed to cross that bridge yet. We've been able to associate private investment activity with fat cats, and until that changes, I don't think our government is going to go near talking about incentivising private investment or looking after mum and dad investors.
Remember, Mike, we had a Labor government not too long ago that was talking about removing negative gearing, as a key policy.
I do remember.
And
I was shortened in the video thinking, well,
and that's always been a rhetoric. It's Labor's always, been there to, make sure that everybody gets a fair go and nobody takes too much advantage of a certain situation. But look, I still believe personally, I don't think institutions, given the way things are at the moment, are going to get heavily into the market. The cost of funding is just, in some circumstances, too great for the level of return that they're looking to obtain. In the end, investors do want to see a level of return, and at the moment, it's a tough market for an investor. The one thing that I did hear Jim Chalmers really emphasise is that they are working towards lowering inflation. They're expecting that inflation will come down below what they even anticipated. Wage growth is not going through the roof, but sustainable, and they're expecting that interest rates will then follow as inflation comes down. So that hopefully will be supportive in terms of an investor looking to get into the market as interest rates come down, and the environment, the property environment becomes more, I suppose, more financially viable for investors to start to continue to buy, and therefore increase supply for renters to reduce the amount of rent that they're paying as the supply increases. Would you agree, Kate, on those comments?
yeah, I absolutely would. If we're talking property,
we're relying on a.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kate, it's my live via satellite delay that's ruining this. I'm going to hand it over to you.
No, continue on, guys. I do want to chat about the impact on some specific property markets with the Hydrogen Power Initiative, but that was just another side comment. Earth to Mike.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry. We're having some technical issues on this. I'm going between two computers. We had the streaming. I had my mobile in the mix. I feel like we've, for a live production with zero budget, we've done all right. But it begs the question. Jeremy has talked about the cost of funding. There are a lot of variables that we need to consider before we get the institutional investors solving this rental crisis by building this supply. And we've talked over and over about supply. And yes, of course, if we have more properties, we potentially will have rental accommodation. But the question is, who's buying them? It's going to be either institutionally owned sort of build to rent style properties, or it's going to be first homeowners, which doesn't solve the problem, or it's going to end up being investors. But it seems to me that investors, private individual investors, can move the needle very, very quickly, whereas increasing the supply, it takes a long lead time, and we might need the funding situation to be much more palatable. What do you think?
1,000%, but that's the unpopular vote, Mike. And until we see that mind shift, we're going to be stuck in this rut with rising rents and tight vacancy rates. I mean, I'm reading some of the comments, greedy landlord has been a popular rhetoric, but, Luke suggested greedy investor or provider of accommodation. Well, of course it's provider of accommodation, but let's be honest, we don't do this from an altruistic point of view when we invest in property. We're picking one asset class because that particular vehicle is suitable to our long or short-term strategy and the way that we want to enjoy the returns on the investment. And if it's not property, it's shares or it's something else. And I think the danger here is that if we're disincentivizing investors, the problem will get a lot worse. That's a different soapbox for me to stand on. But at the end of the day, your point is perfect. We could change this very quickly with opening the floodgates, or at least the opportunity to private investors, as opposed to trying to build more stuff. There's got to be a balance.
And is 1 million new well-located homes over 5 years from 2024 going to be enough when we've got such high immigration figures and we're already at a loss? I mean, I missed, I've got a comment way back up from Pete, but I'm keen to hear from Pete if he's still in the comments there. Is that going to be anywhere near enough, or is that merely going to just keep up with the demand that's already happening and not even solve that problem?
Pete's actually, his wife's calling back to the caravan.
Now,
Come on.
I think I've still got you. Yeah, I've got. You lost me there for a second. We've got some naughty people in the comments figuring out where they're going to pick up their cheap cigarettes. I must intervene and say smoking is very, very naughty, and I know none of you smoke anyway. So you're just being silly. It's a Tuesday night. It's a school night. You need to calm down and be sensible. Let's wrap this up before it gets out of control. Let's go to you first, Cate. The budget. Do we give it a green tick? Were there the things that you thought were okay, but it was offset by things that were lacking? What were your expectations, and how close did we get to meeting them to solve what you see as the structural problems within Australia at the moment?
Well, I wouldn't want to be a policymaker trying to design this budget. I thought they did a reasonable job, and it's really hard when you've got people that are screaming for financial relief, but you don't want to further fuel the spending, and so it's a problem. I think that the green focus has been fantastic in terms of energy and just assisting with energy bills, but also assisting with small businesses and having them look at solar energy and other ways to reduce their spending. That was clever. Obviously, the focus on hydrogen power thrills me as an ex-chemist. I think that's great. And it will be interesting to see what it does to those three markets, Wollongong, Whyalla, Gladstone. That's a side comment, because they've really been plagued by the carbon footprint issue, and that could be a bit of a game changer for some of those manufacturers. I also thought that the healthcare changes, which we haven't chatted too much about, were very clever, especially being able to increase the role of the pharmacy and taking the heat off the GPs, but also if we had to throw money at any segment of our healthcare market, I thought that helping out the hospital workers and the GPs and relieving people of that decision to make around seeking healthcare versus paying your bills when we've got bulk billing covered. That's a huge win, and it's a very Labor thing to do. But yeah, I was impressed with the focus on healthcare and how they tried to manage that with all of the competing priorities. From we've got defence spending, we've got he went through it all. I thought it was a good balance, Mike.
And I think probably more in it than the last couple that we've seen by a country mile, and also some great initiatives in and around domestic violence and veteran support as well. And of course, there's going to be quite a lot of infrastructure spend bringing all this renewable stuff to the actual power grid as well. I was talking to a neighbour of mine who's involved in underground cables to connect offshore wind farms that are still in the kind of planning and feasibility stages, but we could really see a huge investment in renewables. And with the Labor government in the past that talked about real action on climate change, but then also had that Adani thorn in the side that they approved, this one actually seems a little bit more of a straight bat. Jeremy, what about yourself? With this budget, I think the last two, at least, you were extremely disappointed about. This one, there was a little bit more in it. How do you rate it?
Yeah, I probably approve of this budget the most, to be fair, because very clear and concise in his message. You know, he made it clear to say that the economy will slow from 3.25 to about 1.5 before it recovers in the next couple of years to about 2.5%, which is in line with, you know, where we want things to be, between that 2 to 3% range. You know, he's tackled the issues that we've long said that have been around for quite a while, especially in the healthcare sector, especially with health professionals. So good to see an increase in the bulk billing budget, as well as a major increase, around about 15% increase for all the health professionals like your nurses and doctors, people at the front line of during COVID. I think they got left behind for quite a while as things were kind of getting back on track. Businesses, you know, the businesses have had their fair share of a really good couple of years of budget from reckless spending, no doubt about it. But nevertheless, they're still getting some form of incentive with an extension to a smaller amount, but nevertheless, an extension to the instant asset write-off. I like the small businesses energy incentive, and to me, that's stimulating the right way, because it helps create deflation in the market as opposed to inflation by getting small businesses to a point where they're not having to spend a truckload of money to run their operation moving forward. So to me, that's important. Big couple things I do like, and I'm a big fan of the single parenting payment, especially getting those single mothers back into the workforce and some assistance. To see that increase from 8 years to now 14 years is a huge difference. I know many very strong women out there receive the single parenting payment as a top up to their income, and they work their backsides off. So that's exciting to see, and a reward for, you know, all those single mothers getting back to work. Power bill relief, you know, there'll be some assistance there for everybody in relation to that. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like. But this is a better budget, not a huge amount of reckless spending. Definitely very green budget. We can see the influence from the Greens. And I just could probably say that we're very lucky for those key exports, the commodities, the things we dig out of the ground, for bringing us into a position where we have that type of money to splash out that we just did.
And we even talked about green steel. Is that just me sort of being a little bit naive? Is this sort of like clean coal? Is there such a thing as green steel when it is coming out of the earth from iron ore?
Well, effectively, yes, there is. It's a manufacturing of steel without the use of fossil fuels. So you're not producing carbon dioxide when you're using hydrogen.
Right. Yeah, that's why we get the scientists. So it's a lab-grown diamond of steel.
Yeah. No, we're very
wants
lucky.
you to be Jeremy, and Warden is voting me for PM. I'll politely decline. Thank you very much. I'm sure you will as well. You've got enough problems. But before we let it drag on too long, I'll go to any last comments from you guys. But I want to say thank you very much for joining me for another budget. I think probably we won't see another October one, and we'll catch you next May. This is where all the property nerds hang out, apparently, all the cool kids on a Tuesday night. Final words from you, Cate?
Oh, it's been great to catch up with you guys again. Shame we didn't see you on the screen, Pete. Great to have you on the chat. And yeah, I think that we've got a fair bit that will come out tomorrow in the papers that we can have a chat about, a few bits of feedback that will be flying around. But no, it's been a great night and great to have so many people commenting.
Thanks very much for jumping on board. Cate, what about yourself, Jeremy? Is the phone going to be ringing hot tomorrow with people wanting to unpack it with you?
No, I think this one's actually going to be a very, very, very slow Wednesday. There's not a lot there that impacts my side of things from a tax point of view. But like Cate, it definitely feels like without Pete being there, we are missing that musketeer who's not afraid to put his 2 cents in. So Pete, thank you very much for all your comments, mate. It's been fantastic to read what you're writing. And Mike, thanks again for having me here.
It's a pleasure, guys. It's a real honour to share the night with you guys. I had fun. We had probably more technical issues than we like, but, you know, this is the unpolished world of live television. I say television, we got zero budget. I think we did a good job. Thank you very much, you guys both, for sharing your wisdom, and we'll see you next May.
Next.
Follow us on our social media pages. You can find us on Facebook, MCG Quantity Surveyors Tax Depreciation Experts, on Instagram, at MCG Quantity Surveyors, and on LinkedIn, MCG Quantity Surveyors. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more informative videos answering the real estate industry's frequently asked question and other fun content. Don't forget to like and share this video.